everyone, welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. So Record Store Day is coming up on April 18th here in the US. I took a look at the list that came out last week and saw something like 30 jazz titles on it, which is insane because normally there's like, I don't know, 15 or something like that. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to run down each of the titles. I'm going to give you my picks, also probably the ones that I think are going to go the fastest or the ones that are going to be hardest to get. So how on earth am I going to fit this into a single video? Well, I'm going to do my best to go as quick as I can, but I'm also going to include chapter stops in the description. So if you want to skip ahead either to a particular title, or of course you can go to the end and check out my overall recommendations, you're welcome to do that. Before we dive in, as always, please like the video. You can subscribe to my channel. That would be great. And if you want to hear me or hear my thoughts on jazz vinyl on a daily basis, you can head over to Instagram. My handle is what_can_brown. All right, so here we go. So just one quick word. All of these releases are going to be RSD exclusives unless I say otherwise. So what that means is that in some cases they put out a release first for Record Store Day, and then there's going to be a wide release. So I'll mention that when it happens, but most of these are just exclusively Record Store Day titles. So coming up first is Roy Ayers' Daddy Bug. This is being put out by Nature Sounds Records in a quantity of 1,500, and it is going to be on yellow vinyl. So this is originally recorded in 1969 on Atlantic Records, and again, presented here by Nature Sounds, which has been putting out some of the other Roy Ayers titles, I think actually mostly for Record Store Day as well. So this is not their first one. The lineup on this, it's a little bit extensive actually, includes Herbie Hancock, Sonny Chirac, Ron Carter, Buster Williams, Hubert Laws, Jerome Richardson, Freddie Waits, Mickey Roker. There's some strings on here as well. Incidentally, there were many sessions that actually made up this album, and so not all the musicians are featured at the same time. So putting this in context, this was Ayers' follow-up to Stone Souled Picnic, but it's very different in feel. I'd call it actually a lot more introspective. So it opens with this Buster Williams original composition Shadows that's moody and atmospheric, but it doesn't maintain that sound throughout. There are some compositions by Jobim that are, in my opinion, a little bit overproduced with overdubbed strings. It's actually a version of this album, or maybe some of the songs that was put out later without some of that overdubbing. So for reasons I don't really know, this title actually has become quite collectible and even a little expensive to get in its original form, with most copies seemingly going for between like $30 and $60. In my mind, this isn't quite as good as Stone Souled Picnic, and it may indeed have a little bit of a sort of bleed over from the popularity of that record, but there is still some good music here. This next one is by Chet Baker, and actually it's two titles. So this is Live in Japan 1987, volumes 1 and 2, and it's being put out by, it looks like a sort of collaboration, perhaps Solid and Spin This Now. So this is a import from Japan, but being made available, I believe, in the US anyway. Each of these titles are going to be available in quantities of 1,000 copies and are going to be on blue vinyl. So firstly, there are volumes each which are sold separately. Couldn't they have just been combined into a single double disc release? Yes, they really should have. But inevitably, you know, I guess they released them separately, perhaps in Japan, and they wanted to mirror that here. So you're going to have to find them both. Hope that your record store gets both of them, I guess, if you want the full the full concert. So this is recorded June 6th in 1987 in Japan. It's been released already on CD just last year, I think, and so they're kind of doing this Japanese import vinyl edition for Record Store Day. The lineup includes, well, Chet Baker, but he's on trumpet as well as vocals, so he does sing here. We also have Harold Danko on piano, John Engels on drums, and Hein van de Geyn on bass, if that's how you pronounce it. There are audio clips available of this online, and so I did preview it. So it's kind of what you'd expect in terms of Chet playing sort of very softly and sensitively. It does include some of the classic material that Chet Baker is most known for, including a version of My Funny Valentine, which I know is important to a lot of people. Chet does here and there sing a little bit out of tune here, but overall it is a nice performance, seems to have been recorded well, and I think that if you're already a fan of Chet Baker and you like some of his early work, but you also have an ear for how he sounded later, and you kind of understand what that's about, and you still feel that same kind of sensitivity and everything, then I think you're going to like this. All right, so this next one is pretty interesting. It's called Gold Sounds, and it's by James Carter, Cyrus Chestnut, Ali Jackson, and Reginald Veal. So Gold Sounds, a jazz tribute to Pavement, which is pretty interesting. A jazz tribute to Pavement. I actually wasn't previously aware of this, even though it had been released on CD in the past. This is being put out by Modern Harmonic. It's a double LP, and this is a RSD first, meaning first for Record Store Day, but will be released later in a quantity of just 1,000 though for Record Store Day. So, like I said, originally released on CD back in 2005. I believe this is the first vinyl release, and it's I actually didn't mention it is. I mentioned double LP, but it's on gold vinyl. This was cut by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio, so it's nice to see that. I will say that personally, and even though I grew up kind of at the time where I should have been interested in Pavement, I'm not really that interested in Pavement. So I sort of have to evaluate this one on its own, not really recognizing the material maybe that they're covering. I will say that the arrangements are really interesting, and the music is certainly very well executed. It's very much sort of groove forward jazz that merges with some like freeform solos, but it's really exciting, super high energy, and I think that especially James Carter sounds phenomenal on this. All right, next is Don Cherry's Blue Lake being put out by Charlie Records. It's a double LP in a quantity of 1,000. So the material here was recorded live in Paris in 1971. It was first released on the BYG label in Japan in 1974. Actuel did put out some sort of repackaged version of this at some point, but really this in its original form is that BYG album. Really hard to find, quite expensive. When it does sell, it sells for hundreds of dollars, and particularly difficult to get a copy here in the US, I think. So this is being restored and remastered from the original tapes. Features Johnny Diani on bass and OK Tamiz on percussion. Don Cherry, even though we know him as a trumpeter, was also into world music and played a variety of instruments from trumpet to various percussion, and I think he brings all of that here. The music is long format. Just kind of overall. Cherry is on flute on the opening piece, which is really beautiful. I think that I think actually that it's incorrect to describe this music as jazz, and so I feel a little bit guilty including it here in this sort of jazz forward list, but I definitely wanted to include it because it's amazing music, and it's Don Cherry, who many of us know for his work in the jazz space. You definitely get that world music influence that Cherry was so into. So I think this is a great opportunity to hear this music for many of us for the first time, especially on vinyl. Depending on on how this remastering was done, this could really be a highlight for folks interested again in this kind of in this sort of world music, African drums kind of thing. So this is one I'm pretty excited about. This is one that's going to capture a lot of people's attention. So this is John Coltrane, the Tiberi tapes, a preview of the Mythic record. And it is being put out by Verve and Impulse in a quantity of 6,000. So what is this? These are recordings made by the musician Frank Tiberi, who would attend Coltrane shows in clubs over a period of time in the 60s, and he recorded them when he would attend. So what this release is for Record Store Day is a preview in a single LP that encompasses, I believe, just a version of Giant Steps and a version of Satellite, so 2 tracks, 26 minutes in total. So let's address maybe first, what do they mean by a preview of the Mythic record? Because if you remember, last Record Store Day, there was the Miles Davis preview, double LP of a larger vinyl box set that actually was just released a couple of weeks ago. I have it here, and I haven't reviewed it yet. So what is this, and what can we expect coming up, right? I think is the question, or at least was my question. So in this case, the full Tiberi tapes were digitized in 2000, the year 2000. So he had collected them and had them. And they were finally digitized in 2000, and they encompassed 86 CDs. Nevertheless, it sounds like Verve is going to be releasing them in some sort of expanded edition later in 2026, I think in September. Some rumors suggest that it's just going to be a 4 or 5 LP box set, but it's possible that they'll have something more expanded in CD or possibly in digital. So I think what you have to determine, I suppose, is do you want the preview now for Record Store Day, or do you want to wait and see what happens later this year? Well, one thing to note that I think is important is that the sound quality of these tapes is not ideal. You may not care, but this is very much an archival release in sound, and for many people, I understand that Coltrane is anything they want to is any Coltrane is something they want to hear, but at the same time, like you want to hear something that's going to sound great. One thing is clear, and that is that since this is in a quantity of 6,000, that most I think this is actually the most out of any of the releases that I'm going to talk about on this entire jazz list. So rest assured, for those of you who are interested, there's going to be plenty of copies available. So we have more John Coltrane. This is France 1965, The Complete Concerts, and it's being put out by Charlie Records in a 4 LP set in a quantity of 2,500. Incidentally, I couldn't find the price point for a lot of these records, but I wanted to look up some of the box sets in particular just to give you an idea. I believe this one's priced at about $60. So the lineup with John Coltrane here in this quartet is McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones. Captures that quartet in their final European tour. The highlight of this release, in my mind, is a complete performance of A Love Supreme, as well as the tracks Ascension, Impressions, My Favorite Things, Naima, and Afro Blue. Now, as far as this material goes, there was a double LP edition of A Love Supreme, just the A Love Supreme content, that came out in 2024 by the same label. I think it included a few other songs. And now that label is releasing this in this expanded edition. So I think if you missed the previous one and you're interested in, anything Coltrane, and from what I was able to preview, it actually does sound pretty good. This could be an exciting one. I think there's few opportunities to hear Coltrane performing that classic record because he simply just didn't do it very often. But this is one of them, and so I think it's pretty exciting. So why not follow up John Coltrane with some Miles Davis? This next release is The New Soundz, which is a 10-inch record that was put out in the 50s on Prestige. This is being released by Kraft Recordings. They are presenting it in a mono 10-inch disc in a quantity of 2,000. So this was cut from the original mono tapes by Jeff Powell at Takeout Vinyl. That is an engineer that I'm only just starting to hear about. Like I said, 10-inch record, comes in a tip-on jacket. This is being released for its 75th anniversary, but this was actually released for Record Store Day years ago as well, like maybe 2014 or 2015, but actually it was packaged then with the other 10-inch titles that Miles released for Prestige, and that was produced by Nick Phillips. I actually think there were 2 box sets that they did of Miles Davis content on Prestige in these box sets in like consecutive years. So anyway, we get one of those discs this year. I think any Miles is great, and it's gonna grab a lot of people's attention. And let's be real, I know a lot of people, those of you out there, weren't necessarily in the game, as it were, in 2014, going to Record Store Day. So this could be a good opportunity to pick up this classic session. The lineup does include some folks you're going to recognize. It's Jackie McLean, Sonny Rollins, Walter Bishop, Tommy Potter, and Art Blakey. So those of you who have been following my channel for a bit may remember that I've brought up Alabaster DePlume before, including putting him and his music on some of my best of the year lists in years past. So he has a title coming out for Record Store Day, and it is called Dear Children of Our Children. And then I think it kind of continues. I think what he might do is actually just call this EP by the 3 names of the tracks, but it's being put out by International Anthem, and again is a 12-inch EP in a quantity of just 900 copies. So this is an interesting one in that International Anthem doesn't participate in Record Store Day typically, and this album was made, I don't want to say accidentally, but sort of spontaneously while DePlume was on tour. I do believe it is only instrumental, whereas I think those of you who listen to DePlume's work for his other albums, you know that he has a tendency to incorporate vocals on many of his albums, sometimes to great effect, and sometimes I kind of wish that it didn't have it. But what I would say, though, is that if you don't know Alabaster DePlume, there's plenty of material out there to preview, even if I haven't been able to actually hear this particular EP to give you my specific thoughts, simply because I wasn't able to find any of the content online. I really do love DePlume's music. He often incorporates that kind of quivering, breathy saxophone sound that does, I think, a great job of evoking emotion. It's probably going to be moving music. His music is always like very emotional and very like moving for the listener. He just kind of has a talent with creating that vibe. This is what RSD is calling a limited run with regional focus. So just know that this title may not be available everywhere. And I also know that there's International Anthem completists out there. So keep that in mind. This one may actually be pretty hard to find. So we got to have Bill Evans for Record Store Day. This one is at the BBC, the complete 1965 sets. It is being put out by Elemental Music, double LP in a quantity of 3,500. So this is first of several that we're going to talk about by Elemental Records. They always have a, in some ways I don't want to say a dominant presence, but I would say Zev Feldman has a dominant presence at this Record Store Day, as you'll hear throughout the course of this sort of preview. But yeah, so Bill Evans, 1965. He was playing with Chuck Israels and Larry Bunker at that time. The format of this is live, but it's for a TV studio audience. So it is live, but it feels very contained. It's not like it's a large festival or a large concert hall. The material here has been restored and remastered by Matthew Luthans. It's on 180 gram. We have a booklet, as Elemental so often includes. In terms of the content here, Humphrey Littleton offers a couple of introductions throughout the course of this performance, but there's plenty of music here. And it really is like seeing, like if you look at the track listing, it's like seeing a list of Evans's greatest hits in a good way. So everything you want him to play is here. There's 16 tracks in total, but that includes some abbreviated intros and outros, but still, again, a lot of great music. I did preview this just online, and it sounds great. I think that what you're getting perhaps with some of this is a little bit snappier versions of some of the pieces. Not that they're not like 2-minute, things. So they're still complete pieces, but I would say that he doesn't linger quite as long. And I would call this a fairly formal affair in terms of how the music is being presented, again, with a host in front of a TV studio audience. With Evans, though, that never means that you get something that he's just like phoning in. So, if you listen to his version of Waltz for Debbie here, it's going to give you the same sort of goosebumps as it does hearing it on the live Village Vanguard album. I know that there's been a lot of Bill Evans titles over the years for Record Store Day, but in some ways, this one feels, I don't want to say definitive, but for those who aren't completists, who haven't been buying all of the, Resonance or Elemental Bill Evans titles, and if you're wanting to make sure that you get some of his best stuff and really the best examples of his playing at this time period, this release may actually be it. It sounds phenomenal. Again, it's all the music that you're going to know and love if you've listened to Evans's classic albums, and I just think it's in its formality, and again, put that in kind of quotes because it's not like it's not stale. In its formality, it's very wonderful. Like I said, very snappy, very keeps your energy the whole time, and I just think it's a fabulous release. All right, so one of the titles that we come to expect now every year, it seems, is a Vince Guaraldi Charlie Brown soundtrack. So what do we have this year? Well, we have It's Arbor Day Charlie Brown, and we have All Stars, or Charlie Brown All Stars. So this is being put out by Lee Mendelson Film Productions. It is a double, hesitate to say LP, because it's a double 10-inch in a quantity of 5,000. So I've had the Sons of Lee Mendelson on my channel several times to talk about these soundtrack releases. And let's be real, I'm a bit of a super fan of Vince Guaraldi and these soundtracks. One of the things that they mentioned in one of these interviews to me, even several years ago when we first spoke, is that not every special has enough music to be a complete LP sort of soundtrack release. So sometimes the music is short, or there's more like musical cues and less complete tracks. And that hasn't stopped them, though, from, I think, carefully releasing this music in the right format when it makes sense. And so this is the opportunity, this Record Store Day release, to have two of these soundtracks come together in a way that I think is just so complementary. So visually, you have a 10-inch catcher's mitt disc and then a 10-inch baseball disc that is clear but has the white ball label to give you that great image. This is extremely clever, and it really continues in a line, I think, of clever packaging that they've done. You may remember, was it last year's Easter egg release on, so it was like an egg-shaped disc in a variety of colors, captured everybody's attention and sold out very quick. Mark my words, there's no question this is going to sell out, even in a quantity of 5,000. The packaging is too clever, and everybody loves Charlie Brown and Vince Guaraldi. Um, so to just kind of give you a little bit, more, I guess, background on this, Charlie Brown All Stars was just the second TV special that was ever put out. So it followed Charlie Brown Christmas, and it was put out in 1966. Arbor Day, on the other hand, was the 15th and final one that Vince Guaraldi did the music for. And in fact, he passed the same day that it was recorded. Um, so how is this music? Well, I think you get a really wonderful kind of bookend in style from Guaraldi's early work that very much had this sort of bossa feel, especially in 1966, to the 10 years later synthesizer heavy 1976 funky, just 70s thing. And so I think not only does it really do a great job of kind of bookending his work for the Charlie Brown TV specials to go from the second to the 15th, I just think it exudes nostalgia, just all the way around through both of these releases. I think that it delivers on everything that you want a Charlie Brown soundtrack to deliver on. All right, so the next one up is one by Zev Feldman's Time Traveler Recordings, and that is Roy Hargrove in Bern. I think it's just called Bern. So this one's being put out in a quantity of 2,200, and like I said, being released on Time Traveler. That's actually the label that's been handling the Muse reissue catalog. And so it's Zev Feldman alongside James Batsford, who is co-producer, also the man behind New Land Records. So this is a Roy Hargrove performance from 2000, recorded at the International Jazz Festival in Bern, Switzerland. Actually, kind of around the same time that I saw Hargrove at the Village Vanguard. I think I saw him in like '01 or '02. And incidentally, this is actually done in collaboration with Roy Hargrove's estate as well, and the material has never been released before. This is being mastered by Matthew Luthans, but there will be CD as well as digital versions available the following week on April 24th. As far as the lineup goes, Hargrove is in a quintet with Larry Willis, Gerald Cannon, Sherman Irby, and Willie Jones III. In my opinion, this recording is something that's pretty special. So it's Hargrove maybe at his peak, or at least in terms of his sound, because I was able to preview some of this and it sounds phenomenal. I just think wonderful tone, really inspired soloing from what I heard. I wasn't able to preview that much, just a little bit from what I could find online, but definitely an exciting performance. Next up, Wendell Harrison and Tribe, a tribute to Pharoah Sanders. This is being put out by ORG Music, and it is a single LP, quantity of 1,250. This material was recorded live at the Detroit Institute for the Arts. It was actually broadcast by PBS, so I think you could see it at some point on TV and probably still either on pbs.com or maybe even on YouTube. But it was recorded in 2025. It's being put out exclusively for Record Store Day, though, so I think otherwise you'd have to hear it, I suppose, in one of those video formats. If it's the whole thing, I believe the concert was something like 55 minutes long, but I think that that'd be hard to fit on a single LP. So we'll actually see how they present the material, and it's possible that even within the confines of a 55-minute program, it's possible that there was like talking or something or introductions. So maybe they're still able to fit, say, all the music on this, but we'll find out. Speaking of material, though, they do play Sanders's "Love Is Everywhere." The Creator Has a Master Plan, Themby, and others. So I think hopefully they do include it all, but I think the point here is that there's actually a lot of great content. It seems like they chose the right content to honor Pharoah Sanders. So I did preview some of this through the aforementioned video format, and I would say you really do feel the group sort of channeling Sanders' energy. So definitely something worth hearing. All right, this Record Store Data list really comes across as like just a selection of all-stars. It's pretty amazing. So this next one, no exception, Joe Henderson, and the album is titled Consonance, Live at the Jazz Showcase. This is being put out by Resonance Records in what seems like a evolving series of Live at the Jazz Showcase. This is a triple LP in a quantity of 2,000. As far as the lineup goes, we have Joanne Brackeen on piano, Steve Rodby on bass, and Danny Spencer on drums. So this was recorded like the other showcase albums. This was recorded at Joe Siegel's Jazz Showcase in February of 1978. From a time period standpoint, this was recorded right after Joe Henderson's last album for Milestone, which was Black Narcissus. It's probably recorded while he was on tour for that album. That's just my guess. But he would soon leave the Milestone label and moved to San Francisco to teach. So this is kind of right in the middle of those two things happening in early 1978. This is on 180 gram vinyl and interesting, mastered by George Claben and Joe Konix. So it's interesting because I feel like Matthew Luthans has been doing a number of these, but this particular one, George Claben, who's the founder and president of Resonance Records, but also a engineer on so many classic recordings on his own for Strata East and Muse and all these other great labels from the 70s onward, maybe even 60s onward with ESP. So it's interesting that he's doing this one himself. Like I said, part of an ongoing series. So we're going to talk about a couple of others very soon. In fact, I think the next one is also live at the Jazz Showcase. But yeah, triple LP. So this is a lot of material and 2 hours of music. All right, so as promised, Ahmad Jamal at the Jazz Showcase live in Chicago. Also Resonance Records, of course. This is a double LP, also in a quantity of 2,000. So this is Ahmad Jamal in a trio format. We have Frank Gant on drums and John Hurd on bass. This one, not 1978, but this one was captured on, let's see, March 20th and 21st of 1976. So it feels like this archive of Jazz Showcase recordings that Resonance is going through it's not all at the same time period, but it's at least, within a couple of years of each other, it seems. This one is being mastered by Matthew Luthans. On this one, as a double LP format, there's actually over 45 minutes of music per disc. So just like with Joe Henderson, there is quite a bit of music here. All right, so 3 of these Jazz Showcase albums appear next to each other, not because I grouped them, but just because of the last name of the artist. So we have Yusef Lateef's Alight Upon the Lake live at the Jazz Showcase, Resonance Records, triple LP in a quantity of 1,800. This is actually the 3rd Lateef album featured just in the last, call it 2 years, for Record Store Day. The last 2 were actually, let's see, Atlantis Lullaby and Golden Flower. Both were phenomenal. Those actually were put out, however, by Elemental. But of course, with Resonance, we know that there's some connective tissue there in terms of Zev Feldman being the producer for both. But again, Resonance with this one. In terms of the lineup, we have Kenny Barron on piano, which I think is really exciting. I've been getting more and more into his work. Bob Cunningham's on bass. Let's see, Albert Tootie Heath is on drums. This one was recorded in June of 1975, mastered by Matthew Luthans. And in terms of content, I will say, just to give you a sense, like he kind of covers a decent bit of his career in terms of when the compositions were originally recorded and put on, like, say, a studio album. But some of the songs that jumped out at me were Inside Atlantis, Golden Goddess, and Yusef's Mood, which is one that he often played live, I believe. Just like the Joe Henderson, though, this is nearly 3 hours of music. All right, next up is one that kind of caught me by surprise. It was a little bit of an unusual choice, I thought, but pretty exciting. So this is James Brandon Lewis. These are Soulful Days, and it's being put out by Tau Forms, just in a very limited quantity of 500. So you may know James Brandon Lewis from his really amazing album of like a couple of years ago, Jessup Wagon. That's one of the best albums, sort of modern jazz music, I think, that's been put out, and it was so recognized by critics and such. I think he also won Artist of the Year by Downbeat last year. So this is a guy who is doing a lot of exciting things right now. What these are Soulful Days. This is a long form composition for string quartet and tenor. It's performed by Lewis and the Lutosławski Quartet, and it was commissioned by Poland's National Forum of Music. So from a content standpoint, it consists of a prologue followed by 5 movements and then an epilogue. So this is not, I would call squarely in the jazz space, but because it is a musician who is very much known for jazz music, as well as the fact that I think that there's some correlations between classical and jazz, and it happens to be meshed very much together here, I wanted to include it in my list and bring it to your attention. All right, so Craft Recordings is known for often reissuing a studio album and including it in the Record Store Day list. Well, this year we have Abbey Lincoln's That's Him. This was originally put out on Riverside. Craft is releasing it in a quantity of 2,000. So recorded in originally in 1957, the lineup is pretty impressive. We have Sonny Rollins, Kenny Dorham, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Max Roach. This is a really nice album, and I think that the level of the sort of the quality of the accompaniment is like a pleasant surprise if you haven't heard this album before. So even with this lineup, theoretically they could stay in the background and just let Lincoln be the one in the spotlight. But in some ways, I feel like their accompaniment, especially Sonny Rollins's, is represented almost in like an equal playing field, at least in parts. Like this is still very much an Abbey Lincoln record, and I think it comes together very nicely here. So as with some of the others that Craft Recordings has put out, this is all analog mastering by Kevin Gray. It's pressed on 180 gram at Fidelity Record Pressing with tip-on jacket. So let's see. I think what's interesting is that depending on where you look, like I said that this is in a quantity of 2,000. I think that actually might be the US number, but the worldwide number is something like 4,200 because depending on where you look, you get different numbers. Keep that in mind, by the way. When I state what the quantity is, that's usually because it's what recordstoreday.com says, and sometimes that is a US number. So John McLaughlin is on the Record Store Day list with music from Abandoned Heights. This was and is being put out by Impex Records. I'll explain in a second. In a quantity of 450. So this is kind of a curious addition, and actually I was trying to do research to understand it because the Impex version of this album came out already. It came out in November. It's available on Acoustic Sounds right now for $40. So what's the deal with the exclusive Record Store Day release, right? Well, it turns out, from what I've been able to find, it turns out it's a limited color vinyl edition in sunset yellow and red swirl vinyl. I believe that that's the only difference. It could be that it's numbered, but otherwise, I think this has already been released, and it's kind of a curious order too. Like you'd almost think they'd do Record Store Day and then do the standard. But in any event, it's recorded and mixed by George Murphy, mastered by Chris Bellman at Bernie Grundman Mastering, pressed at RTI. I listened to a bit of this, and by the way, I know that the vinyl community on YouTube is already going sort of gaga over this album. It sounds to me, just from my personal, I don't know, perspective, it sounds very contemporary jazz in style. And I understand that it was recorded for a movie and it never came out, but for me, it is so overwhelmingly 80s in style that I just don't think that this one is for me. Like it really sort of borders along smooth jazz. But I also think that we have to remember that John McLaughlin was kind of an innovator in the space. And so some of that you'd sort of expect. Now, from a sound standpoint, it does sound fantastic, like just from a purely like sonic perspective. But since I'm not a big fan of John McLaughlin's music, I know that I'm not the intended audience for this release. So we'll kind of leave it at that. But if you are interested in his music, there's a lot of people who are getting very excited about this release. So next up is Saint Germain, and this is one that also confused me just a little bit. I was trying to understand. I think there's just not enough information about some of these releases out there, and I don't know whether to blame their presence or lack of a publicist, or or maybe just I don't know, they weren't in control or didn't know what information to put out. This one's a little bit confusing for me because this is Saint Germain, and it's Saint Germain Remixes is the name of the album, but I'm not entirely sure. I guess where these are from. So let me kind of explain. So this is being put out by Rhino. It's a double LP, quantity of 1,500. It is a color vinyl edition, and it's in blue. And this is being described as remixes and alternative versions of songs from his African project, but they also refer to it as his latest album. And I don't know what album they're talking about. What is the latest album? Is there one that just came out? I couldn't find anything about it, and I don't know what this African project means. Um, from what I can tell, though, it seems like this material's been released before, at least online, because some of the tracks have been digitally available for a while. So maybe it's the first time it's being put out in physical form. I don't really know because they're making it seem like it's remixes of new songs, but I think some of them have been online for at least 10 years. So maybe we can all do more research on this one. In my opinion, This one will probably have more appeal in Europe because I believe that there's more fans of Saint Germain's music, as well as certainly the Blue Note album abroad than here in the US. But like, let's be real. I think people have a appreciation for Saint Germain here as well. I got into Saint Germain when I was in college and became a big fan of the of that style of jazz. So I'm a fan. I just thought that this one was a little bit curious in terms of the details. All right, so I hesitated to include this one, but then I thought I'd better anyway. And the reason is because this one is Europe only. So, why I wanted to include it anyway is because those of us who are industrious will find a way to get titles that are exclusive to the international community, or in this case, Europe. So I wanted to bring it forward, and also the fact that it's an Elemental release, and I'm covering the other Elemental titles, so I didn't want to exclude this one. So this is by Michel Petrucciani, and it is called Kuumbwa. It's like I said, on Elemental. It's a double LP. This is a previously unreleased trio concert by the pianist. It was recorded live at the Kuumbwa Jazz Center in California, actually, in 1987. And like I said, it's available in the EU. There are CD and digital editions that will also follow it on April 24th, and certainly those are going to be more available as opposed to a limited edition in record stores in Europe for those of us in the United States. Again, I know that half my audience is outside the United States. As far as the mastering, this is done by Matthew Luthans, who is, does the mastering for the other Elemental and many of the Resonance titles. And, I didn't mention the rest of that lineup. So joining Petrucciani, we have Dave Holland and we have Elliot Zygmunt, excuse me. So continuing the theme of sort of outside the United States, the next one, also, okay, just on the edge of jazz, probably not really, but he gets involved in jazz and it's just great music, so I thought I'd include it. This is Ryuichi Sakamoto's End of Asia. It's being put out by Gearbox in single LP form, quantity of 1,500. So again, I'll sort of call this jazz adjacent because Ryuichi Sakamoto was multi-genre composer and instrumentalist, and honestly, I just think this is one of those titles to look forward to. This is the first time it's been on vinyl since the Japanese edition in 1982. From a genre standpoint, I would suppose that some would call this modern classical in style, but I think like so much of his music, it's multifaceted. This one happens to have elements of electronic music and even, I guess what we would call video game music in retrospect. This is cut by Casper Sutton Jones in London, and it will be on 180-gram vinyl, and it will include an Obi strip. So not the first time we've seen Gil Scott-Heron represented on Record Store Day. I believe we had Winter in America. It was either last year or the year before. That was a great one. This is Reflections by Gil Scott-Heron being put out by Culture Factory in a quantity of 1,700. Supposedly, I've elsewhere seen the quantity listed as 5,000, so we'll see what happens with that. This is being put out on Purple Marble vinyl, and it will include an Obi strip as well. So I do love seeing Gil Scott-Heron on the list this year. I don't think it's the first time that Culture Factory has indeed been the label to bring one to us. So they seem to be familiar with how to get access to his albums and to and to put them out. There is a famous track on this album, and it's the track B Movie. So I know that a lot of folks, when they hear Gil Scott-Heron's music, one of the things that kind of grabs them is when you hear, things that have been sampled. And so you probably will hear some of that here as well. I believe that there's never been a reissue in the US of this album. And I believe it's also the first time on vinyl since 1985. So this is an example, I think, of a record that is sort of well-deserving of the Record Store Day treatment. All right, so we have two albums now by Masayoshi Takanaka. The first one I'm going to discuss is All of Me. This is being put out by Universal Music. It's a double LP in a quantity of 2,500. So if you don't know of this album, I think you're in for a treat. Now, this also isn't strictly jazz. Probably the more accurate way to describe it would be jazz fusion, sort of city pop in style. But I love this genre. And this is one of those albums that always does well in DJ sets in many of the places that you expect to hear jazz. So had to include it and the other Takanaka album. So the audio quality of this of this particular music is phenomenal, and I'm really hoping that Universal Music does a good job with the presentation of it. Have every reason to believe they will. It's being presented on deep blue vinyl, and it actually comes with a poster as well. And to describe what this is, I suppose it's sort of a best of almost of Takanaka's work between 1976 and 1978. But funnily enough, it was presented in this compilation back then in Japan as well. So it isn't some sort of like chopped up US version. It's a reissue of a compilation that in and of itself, that compilation is very much sort of sought after. And I actually happen to have a copy here in my shelves already as well. So the other album by Masayoshi Takanaka is called On Guitar. This is not being put out by Universal Music. It's being put out by Victor Entertainment, and it's a quantity of 2,500 as well. So this one, like the other, is sort of an import from Japan. And I'm kind of, when I see that in the record store day list, sometimes I'm a little unclear. I mean, I understand it's an import, but are all those copies coming to the US for record store day? I don't exactly know. So we'll find out. This was originally put out in 1978 and was part of what was called the Professional High Technique series, which was for instrumental instruction. So on this album, though, what I would say is that there's some great material and it's played very well. So he handles famous tracks like Bobby Womack's Breezin', which George Benson later turned into a hit as well. There's covers of Billy Joel, Santana, Earth, Wind and Fire. But overall, a really fun album for fans of fusion and rock. So it's like 43 minutes of music here. And though I would say that it's very heavily produced, some of the instrumentation may be from a synthesizer, but it's not like a solo performance. So I guess what I'm getting at is that yes, it's for instruction, but it doesn't fully come across that way. Because again, it's not just him playing guitar. And so I don't know. I think it's great music on its own. Maybe just a tad more on the beat than off. So maybe it isn't as sort of complex as if Takanaka was really going crazy with like a larger group or something with improvisation. Like this is more like sort of structured. And so I think that maybe that's the element that sort of leans into the for instruction kind of element. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that I think this album stands on its own too. So here's an interesting one. This is the Cecil Taylor unit. It's titled Fragments, the complete 1969 Sal Pleyel concert. It's being put out by Elemental. It is a triple LP and in a quantity of 1,550. So this one, in terms of the music, has been on the internet for a bit, but this is the first official release of this music and certainly the first on vinyl. In total, it's about an hour and a half of music. And how I would describe it is that it is free jazz and it is challenging, like pure free jazz music. So if you think like it just in terms of placing this in Cecil Taylor's sort of career, this is just before he went to Antioch College to teach. And I would say that the group he was playing with at that time was perhaps his most adventurous. So to that point, the lineup includes Sam Rivers, Jimmy Lyons, and Andrew Surreal. In terms of the music, like I said, it's free jazz. I wouldn't expect any sense of time here. And in fact, melody is hard to find as well. This is like spontaneous group improvisation, and it's pretty wild. So I think for those of you who really dig that kind of music, this is going to be something special. I know a lot of people really lean into Cecil Taylor, even if to the extent that he's represented in my shelves, it's when he's playing just a little bit more inside the box. All right, we're getting towards the end here, but there are indeed some really exciting titles to finish us out. So we have Charles Tolliver All-Stars, and it is titled Right Now and Then. It's being put out by the collaboration of Mac Ave and Strata East Records. It's a single LP in a quantity of 1,250. So this is Charles Tolliver's debut, and I think fitting that it would be released, or in this case reissued by Strata East, even though it was not on that label when it was originally put out. The lineup here includes Gary Bartz, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Joe Chambers. So a fantastic, fantastic lineup joining him. It's actually been remixed by Charles himself. with audio cut directly from the original analog tapes. It's mastered by Kevin Gray, pressed on 180 gram at RTI. So very much the hallmarks of some of the rest of the Strata East Mac Ave collaboration, right? In terms of what we've seen them put out. So you may wonder, like, why Strata East and like what's the deal, but it wasn't put out by them originally. So the history here is that actually it was originally released by Polydor and Freedom Records in Europe in 1971. It's followed by a release in Japan. It was given like a new cover design in 1975 and put out by Arista. It was retitled, I think it was retitled Paperman when they put it out. And then finally there was a Pure Pleasure release in the UK, but I would call this edition the one that is fully blessed, again, remixed by Tolliver and presented in high quality format. I also think that kind of in retrospect, this could have been on Strata East because, you know, Tolliver and Cowell were starting that label, and maybe this was just a little bit too early, but it was like right after this they decided to form this label. So I think it very much has the you know, sort of the same spirit as the Strata East stuff. And obviously you do have that Charles Tolliver connection in terms of it being his first album as a leader. So now we have a McCoy Tyner release. This is called The Seeker, live at the Umbria Jazz Festival. This is being put out by Red Records. It's a double LP, and this is an RSD first in a quantity of 1,200, meaning if you miss it, you'll be able to get it, hopefully, for the full release. So let's see what to say. This was recorded in 1990, so relatively recently, but one of the few occasions where Tyner was performing with Hutcherson. There's not that many instances. You'd think that they would have collaborated a lot more than they did. So I think I mentioned double LP on black vinyl, 180 gram. Lineup includes Avery Sharp and Aaron Scott joining Tyner's, well, that's forming that trio. And then we have Bobby Hutcherson on vibes. As far as the track listing, there are a bunch of Tyner originals. There is some Monk, and there's also some Hutcherson. I think that this is going to be an exciting one because Hutcherson and Tyner were playing at such a high level throughout their entire careers, right? And we only lost, Tyner relatively recently. I want to say Hutcherson may have been just a little bit longer ago, but they were both playing, you know, well up until the to the end of their lives, and again at an extremely high level. I think that in 1990, seeing these two come together in a live format, I think is going to be pretty exciting. So every record store day, we get a Jazz Dispensary compilation. So let me tell you about this one. So this is called Magia Brasileira. I think that's how you pronounce that. So Craft Recordings is obviously what, the label behind Jazz Dispensary. So they're putting this out in a quantity of 4,000. Like I said, we get one every year, but it's a compilation that I think it's always worthwhile. It's always something to look forward to. This one happens to focus on Brazilian music or Brazilian jazz. So this includes material from Bolacete, Flora Purim, Dom Romão, João Donato, and others. I could go on, but my pronunciation gets worse with each name. They're putting this out on green, yellow, and gold vinyl, and listen, like, I understand that, like, generally speaking, kind of random compilations you sort of look sideways at, but what is proven to be the case is that Jazz Dispensary does such a great job of bringing tracks that you otherwise, like, most of the time I don't know I've never heard the tracks before, and like I don't have the albums that they're on. So they seem to do a good job of curating these tracks together and in a way that makes me get excited for, call it like the source album that they came from. So anyway, I have every expectation that this is going to be another cool one. All right, so I'm going to bring one more Jazz at the Showcase title in for you here. This is by Mal Waldron. It's called Stardust and Starlight Live at the Showcase. So Resonance Records, double LP, quantity of 1,800. So this one, let's see. We've talked about some Jazz at the Showcase titles from like 75 and 76 and 77 or maybe 78. This one is recorded in August 1979. Mastered from the original tapes by Matthew Luthans, pressed at La Vinylist. As far as the lineup, this is kind of interesting. So we have bassist Steve Rodby, we have drummer Wilbur Campbell, and then Sonny Stitt comes in as like the guest star on two of the songs, which I think is really interesting. The material actually is a little bit surprising as well. So if you think, 1979, we're going to hear some of Mal Waldron's more, I don't know, out there compositions or more like contemporary stuff. Well, You don't. More of the material here is actually in that kind of hard bop, or at least like earlier style, sort of like playing standards. And so probably a great sort of landscape for Sonny Stitt to then come in as well and play with the group. So I think this is going to be really exciting. I mean, Mal Waldron was playing some phenomenal music throughout his career. He obviously demonstrated he could do it all. He could accompany, Billie Holiday. He could do his own kind of almost experimental stuff that he was doing for new jazz in the early 60s. He could accompany others in sort of the jam session styles, right? So he could really do it all. And I think I just think that this is going to be super interesting to hear him in this showcase venue and just hear what he was doing in 1979. Incidentally, for this one, as well as I think the other Resonance titles, the CD will be coming out the following week. So if you're more of a CD format person, you can obviously wait for that too. All right, so it's the last one, number 30. Buster Williams' Pinnacle, being put out by Time Traveler Recordings in a quantity of 1,500. So the interesting thing here is that this is Time Traveler's Muse series, but it is a Record Store Day exclusive. So maybe difficult to find. So this is cut all analog by Matthew Luthans, pressed at optimal, Stoughton jacket, 180-gram disc. The lineup includes Woody Shaw, Sonny Fortune, Earl Turbinton, Onaje Allen Gooms, Billy Hart, Guilherme Franco, and then you also have a few vocalists as well. The music here is a ton of fun. It's inventive, it's spiritual, it's post-bop. It incorporates world music sound as well. Um, the difficult part of this one for a lot of folks is going to be that if you're a huge fan of this Muse series already and you've been picking up the Joe Chambers, right, that just came out, and like, the Woody Shaw, and like you're getting all the stuff, you're going to want this too. Quantity of 1,500. So I mean, here's the thing, go preview this, but this is worth the attention. It's worth it being on Record Store Day. And they're creating some excitement around this reissue series, and I think it's I mean, you can't do much better than Buster Williams. All right, so now the sum up, right? So you may be the sort of person that wanted to skip ahead because this was a long video, and I get it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about, we're going to try and pick out the ones that I think are going to be the most sought after, which I think also has some good overlap with my own personal favorites. All right, so the first one I want to talk about is Vince Guaraldi's It's Arbor Day and Charlie Brown All-Stars soundtrack, both because I think it's a great title for Record Store Day in terms of it being like a highlighted list, but I also think it's going to be one of the hardest ones to get in the entire jazz list. So if you remember last year for Easter, those Easter egg shaped ones went so quick. A lot of people were disappointed they missed out, and I think they've outdone themselves with the packaging again. This time we have a catcher's mitt for one disc, and we have a baseball for the other, and they look so cool together. It's a double 10-inch. Listen, people are gonna see this in the aisle. They're going to notice that it's peanuts. They're going to notice the super cool packaging, and then I think that they're going to be surprised at how good the music was for these soundtracks as well. So, gotta mention that that's going to be a pretty tough one. I have to be honest. So the next one, and I know I just covered this right at the end when I was going through each of them sequentially, but I want to bring this one to your attention again as one of the highlights, and that's Buster Williams's Pinnacle. So people really gravitate towards these high quality limited editions, especially when it's a studio album. So again, this is not archival. This is an just excellent studio album in an excellent series that Time Traveler is doing with the Muse catalog. There's only 1,500 copies out there, so you know that this one's going to be a really tough one to grab. So the next ones I want to highlight as sort of a grouping are the Resonance titles. So these include multi-disc albums by Mal Waldron, Joe Henderson, Yusef Lateef, and Ahmad Jamal. If there's going to be one that's going to be more desirable than the other, my opinion, it's probably going to be the Joe Henderson, but let's be real. I think each of these four legends performing live is something to look out for. This is a really interesting time period, and I know from hearing some of the other recordings at the Jazz Showcase, these are going to sound great. Obviously, people collect Resonance records and buy, pretty much all of the titles that come out, or they attempt to. So, those of you looking for this are sort of, you're a little bit in competition maybe with a larger group than you would be for any other individual title. But I wanted to mention those as a grouping because I know that there's always a lot of excitement out of what they put out. All right, so the next one, Charles Tolliver's first album, his debut album, is going to be the next one. So both because I think there's a strong appreciation for his music at this very moment, and it's being put out by the folks Mac Ave and Strata East that are doing that Strata East reissue series. So there's going to be that kind of attention to this music, and you know that, well, you know that they have that kind of attention to the detail and obviously the respect for this music. So I think this is going to be a really good one. Coltrane. So there's two Coltrane albums that are on the list. I don't think that Tiberi Tapes one is that interesting. Now I understand that the story behind it, and I'm not saying that the music isn't interesting and the idea behind it, but if they're going to be putting out that later, for me, like the one that I'm going to include on this list here of ones that I think is sort of the most exciting, I have to say it's the France concert. I think it's going to have better sound quality than the Tiberi tapes, and I think it's also the one that you're not going to be able to get later in some kind of expanded edition. All right, so Bill Evans. We always have to talk about Bill Evans at Record Store Day. Elemental is putting one out this year as well, and I think this year's release is something special in particular for the reasons I previously mentioned. Sounds really great. Obviously great lineup, great track listing, the whole picture. All right, so it's really difficult to isolate this best of kind of list to just enough that it's comprehensive of some of the best titles, but not so many. So I'm just stating them again, and I've already listed a bunch. I do just want to say, in addition to the ones I've referenced, there's two more that maybe I'm really looking forward to that maybe you should prioritize. At least after I find my copies. So Masayoshi Takanaka's "All of Me" is such a fun recording, and I already have the original compilation, but I think it would be fun to get a modern pressing of it. If you don't know that one, just go listen to it and listen to many tracks because there's like a different vibe on each of them. And then I also have to say the Roy Hargrove at Bern is going to be the last one I want to bring up. This is new material, being unearthed from Hargrove, which I think is, it's always needed. It's always worth listening to. Like I said, I've been a big fan of his for a while, and I just think that this is like Hargrove at some of his best. That what I was able to preview sounds phenomenal, and I just think I just hope that I can still get a copy. All right, so that's it. Did I miss anything? I hope not, because that was 30 titles. Took a while, but hopefully at least this recap at the end was helpful for some of you, so that you know what to look out for when you go out there for Record Store Day. Losing my voice. But yeah, I think overall, high level comments, phenomenal list. There's so many jazz titles. Normally, like I said up front, there's like 14 or something like that. 30 titles. Not all of them have to be for you. I think the point is that there's something for everyone on this list. And honestly, there's a lot that I'm interested in. More so than this may be like the best Record Store Day that I've seen for jazz. Like I just can't think of another one that was better. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. Obviously, let me know what you think in the comments. And sometimes I do get preview copies of some of these as we get closer. If I do, I'll do my best to make another video and share my thoughts on any of those titles, just to give you a little bit better idea of what to expect, maybe a little bit more detailed comments. So thanks everyone for your attention, and I'll see you next time.